I think FP&A has really become more of the sort of strategic decision-making center within an organization. I think it actually accelerates the strategic nature of what we do. Now, with generative AI and all the tools that are available to teams, I think that part becomes much more simplified. The pricing structures, especially as you get into generative AI and like per request, it's very complex. I can imagine if that's not something that is on your frame of reference, like it can be super hard to the basis of lots of relationships. And that's really what business partnering is, building that trust and ultimately doing what you say you're going to do. And so I think if you can do those things, you'd be super successful. Learning to set expectations is super important.
This week's title sponsor is Plan Buddies, the #1 planning community for planning professionals. Check it out at planbuddies.com and join me in the community today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to FP&A Tomorrow, where we delve into the world of financial planning and analysis, examining its current state and future prospects. I'm your host, Paul Barnhurst, and I'll be guiding you through the evolving landscape of FP&A. Each week, we're joined by thought leaders, industry experts, and practitioners who share their insights and experiences, helping us navigate today's complexities and tomorrow's uncertainties. This week, I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Tyler Cyphers. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to be here, man.
Yeah, really excited to have you. So let me just give a brief introduction from Tyler, then we'll jump in. He comes to us from Franklin, Tennessee.
Yeah.
He is the CEO and founder of OpsCipher. He has a BS in finance or business from University of Central Florida and his MBA from Rollins College. So Tyler, we always like to start with this question before we get into a little more about your background.
Sure.
In your opinion, kind of from your experience, what is great FP&A? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, when I got into FP&A, 10, 12 plus years ago, I think FP&A was largely considered a very sort of back of the house, seen and to not be heard from, strictly generate reports type of function.
Yep.
I think in the last probably like 7 or 8 years, and it's really accelerated in the last several years. But I think FP&A has really become more of the sort of strategic decision-making center within an organization. And so what does good look like? I think it's one thing to take, from a reporting perspective, your sort of your financials, your cash flow forecast and so forth. But then the sort of the magic is really then being able to provide that perspective and that visibility and that really, I guess, decision making, from a business standpoint on what that means from a profitability standpoint, what that means for our growth and so forth. So really that more forward looking aspect of guiding and driving the business. So that's sort of how I see it today.
It makes a lot of sense. It's really that guiding and driving. And I agree with you, 10, 15 years ago, very much a back office function. I still remember we were viewed that way, and we wanted to go to this conference. It was a MicroStrategy conference because we're implementing MicroStrategy. And I worked for a business travel organization.
Okay.
The company had enough people going that our tickets to the conference were free. I had to find free certs from an airline since we were travel. We had to stay in the La Quinta off the strip with free certs. Everybody else was at the Wynn for the conference. I think my total, my boss did some of the meals. Most of the meals were covered.
Yeah.
I think my total reimbursement was less than $100.
Wow.
For like the 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Now my boss spent a little bit too, but I bet for the three of us, they spent less than $1,000. I was like, all right, we're back office for sure.
Yeah. You don't get any of the fancy perks, that's for sure.
Yeah. And it was also, 2009, 2010. So it wasn't a time that, I think it was 2010 by this point, but it might have been late 2009. Companies weren't willing to spend a lot either.
Yeah.
So it was pretty funny, but that was my welcome to, corporate world. Remember your back office.
It's not super glamorous.
No. And so the next question we like to ask people is, you've described what great FP&A is, that decision making, that forward looking, informing the business.
Yeah.
How do you see FP&A changing over the next 5 years with the generative AI and just everything that's gone on? Do you see it kind of still being the same, or do you see the function really evolving?
Yeah, I, there's a lot of talk of AI and what will it do to jobs and so forth. I think for FP&A specifically, I think it actually accelerates the strategic nature of what we do. I think, right, if I look back, kind of think back to like when I started early on in my career and I was truly trying to, make my way, right? It was around, the typical things, taking that day-to-day reporting and sort of the sort of the ins and outs, the blocking and tackling of the business, figuring out how do we fix things that are broken, optimize and streamline processes so that we can ultimately spend as much time as possible like on that back end, really understanding the business, working with business partners and really driving outcomes. So I think, when I did it, it was like a lot of heavy lifting, right? Now with generative AI and all the tools that are available to teams, I think that part becomes much more simplified. And I think then the focus and the value add comes then on the back end, right? And so again, I just think I don't know that it necessarily is a massive landscape shift. I think it means that the tools and the skills that, good FP&A people will have and own will slightly differ, be probably less technical, more analytically, problem solving, sales oriented, frankly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's always interesting to hear how everybody thinks of it. And I think that's generally one thing we see is there's that hope and belief that it will help with many of the mundane tasks, the
Yeah.
data prep, the data cleansing as we continue to go on and allow us to be more strategic. I even heard one person who kind of shared that he thought we may have to be more kind of data science, technical in that area, less so in many of the things we do today, the data cleaning and the
Right.
prep. And I thought that was kind of interesting,
Yeah.
right? You know, to understand the basics of an algorithm. So it'll be fascinating to see how it kind of all plays out over the next several years and
Yeah.
decades, frankly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that like there's some interesting tools that automate a lot of the ETL process, extract,
Yeah.
load, transit, like, and I think those will be very interesting to help again sort of automate bringing together a bunch of disparate data sources and sort of creating more of that back end data warehouse, for lack of a better term. But yeah, it's interesting, and I'll be keen to see where things go from here for sure.
Agree. So we've talked a lot about just kind of general FP&A. Let's get to know you a little better before we jump into some more questions here. So can you tell our audience your background? You mentioned you've been FP&A, I think about 12 years.
Yeah.
You're running your own business, but maybe give us a little bit more of your story.
Yeah. So I grew up in Florida. You mentioned I went to UCF and then did my MBA at Rollins. I sort of got into finance there, working for Disney at the time. I met my wife, who she was working for Lockheed Martin on like a contract role. Ended up kind of following her. Ended up in California for like roughly 8, 9, 10 years. And then yeah, we kind of bailed there roughly 2, 3 years ago. We have young twin daughters, and so we moved to the Nashville area to be a little bit closer to my family. And yeah, professionally, like you said, I've kind of been in and around finance for 12 plus years. Started with Disney, spent the last probably 10 or so years in sort of the cybersecurity sort of vertical with a couple of relatively large software companies there running FP&A. And yeah, I left early part of this year, like you mentioned, and kind of set off on my own to build my own sort of consulting business, doing sort of fractional CFO and fractional FinOps work. So it's been a kind of a heck of a journey.
I can imagine. So the first question I have, if I remember right, your specialization was marketing in college. Is that right?
Yeah,
But how did you end up your first, from what I saw, your first role with Disney was finance. I think it was marketing finance.
yeah.
It was finance based. How did that happen? How did you end up
Yeah.
Going from marketing, which is usually not viewed as that numbers finance type role,
Yep.
analytical role, even though there can be those people, to, hey, I'm the numbers guy, so to speak. How did that happen?
Yeah, honestly, I'm still not entirely sure. So I was going to school in the evening. So I was working full time for a small laser manufacturer, and I was going to do my MBA at night in sort of a professional program. And they had somebody come in and basically just give us a presentation on sort of the internship program at Disney. So one night I spent an hour and I, did the application online. And at the time, like I said, I had a marketing undergrad degree. And so I applied for the marketing internship. And once you finish the application, it says, oh, hey, there's these other internships you could also apply for, right? And all you got to do is sort of just click the button. You don't have to re-enter your information. It's already there. And so I was like, okay, cool. So like I kind of clicked the button on a few. um, I didn't get a single call about marketing or anything else. I got called back for finance, and I went through the initial round of interviews, and yeah, there's thousands of people apply for these things. And I think they had 30 or 35 internships, and I don't.
Sure, yeah, Disney gets a ton of
Yeah,
applications.
exactly. And so yeah, I got lucky enough. I got hired on to like a 6 month internship in sort of resorts finance. And then, then I got hired after 6 months. I got brought on full time, and I ran sort of our international sales, marketing, finance. Did that. So yeah,
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. It's kind of funny how those little things sometimes work out that you're like, I'll just click these buttons. Odds are nothing will happen, but it doesn't take any time.
yeah. Like I said, I didn't think anything of it. I never intended to go into finance. I mean, I've always been good with numbers, but I've always sort of thought of myself as more on the social side than what I think most people would think of as a traditional finance person.
And I think that's starting to change. We're definitely seeing
Definitely.
that. But I agree with you. There used to be the idea, right? The pencil pocket, and hey, you get your push your glasses,
Yeah,
and
right.
you're the
Yeah.
typical bean counter accountant if you work
Yep.
anything in finance. Where now you're starting to see, like you said, strategic center for FP&A.
Yep.
Really need to be able to manage business relationships, get out in front of people. So it's been great to watch because I, like you, that's my favorite part of FP&A
Totally.
is working with people. Yes, I love a good spreadsheet. I like my numbers. I can work my way around them.
Yeah.
But if you ask me what I enjoy the most, it's those relationships and the decision support, helping move the business forward.
I'm right there with you.
And kind of speaking of that, I know at your last two companies before you started your own business, you were head of FP&A. So, what's the number one thing from your kind of vantage point, that FP&A needs to do to really be viewed as that strategic business partner to help make sure the business realize they're not just back office and leave me alone, go run your spreadsheets.
It's a good question. I think where I the people that I've seen be very successful, and sort of on the flip side, those that have struggled, the people that are the most successful have genuine curiosity about the business. So it's very hard to go into whether you're supporting sales and marketing or the engineering teams, your customer success. It's very hard to go into those teams and try to be that sort of analytical value add extension and sort of thought partner if you can't, one, understand their challenges, what their business is, and really ultimately it comes down to sort of being able to sort of talk the talk. So like you have to be able to communicate on their level and understand your reports, your analysis, whatever, in the context of the business and why it's important to them. And so I think that's the one thing where it sounds so simple, but people don't do it. They're so in their silo of the spreadsheets and the numbers. And it's like, I got to get this report out. It's like, if you would just take some time to understand why you're doing it in the first place and understanding the business impact and context, I think people would be a lot more successful over the long term.
I agree with you. So I'm going to have a follow-up question here.
Yeah.
Any practical tips you can offer to do that? Like, let's say I'm new in a role. I've just come in. I'm head of
Yeah.
FP&A. I know you've been in those situations.
Yeah.
What maybe 2 or 3 things that you can do in those first 90 days to show the business that you want to be the partner, that you want to be strategic and really start to develop those relationships so
Yeah.
that you're not in 6 months and then trying to figure out how do I crack down the door and get them to
Yeah.
let me talk to them.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I don't know if I'll give you 3 or 1 or 2, but
Yeah, whatever
I
comes to
think when
mind.
you first come in, you have to be intentional about finding time, right? So whether that's setting up one-on-ones or talking to, different people within the business, you have to get in front and face to face with people. Now, I think traditionally, maybe a lot of finance, FP&A folks, that's not their bread and butter, and it can make people nervous. But ultimately, that like there's no shortcut to like real life conversations, and in those conversations, I think you know really putting your sort of pride aside and like not being afraid to ask questions. Like there's no harm in not knowing, right? Like, in admitting like, hey, I don't know all of the answers. Like I want to make sure that like I'm here to help. Can you tell me a little bit about your business? Like what are the key challenges that you're facing? What are the pain points? And that'll really start to build a framework for you to maybe dig in a little bit more and figure out, okay, like where do I fit in? Like what is my role within the business and how can I support them to make their lives easier? And so really, I think that sort of humility, I think, is a huge aspect of like not being afraid to ask questions and really learn that way. So,
I like it. If I was to summarize that, I would almost say 3 things is 1, be intentional.
yep.
2, make time. 3, check your ego at the door and learn.
Yeah, I love that. Yep.
Right? Because we all have that sometimes where you're like, well, I can figure this out after. I don't want to be the stupid one and ask that question. So let's move to the next question we have here. You write a weekly article.
Yep.
You have a kind of a newsletter called Cash Flow for Coders.
Yeah.
And I know that's around helping coders, simplifying finance for non-finance people.
Yeah.
First, how did you come up with the name? Where did Cash Flow for Coders come from?
I mean, I can't lie to you. Like ChatGPT is fantastic. So,
No,
but
used it
I
for
honestly, I
as
probably
well.
went through like hundreds of different names and iterations, and I'm like, I like this, don't do that. And then I came down to probably 4 or 5 that were in that realm of, to your point, what's the word I'm looking for?
That you like, that were in the realm of
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
made
yeah. So
sense.
I guess it just in the realm of like teaching. I'm lost.
Yeah, they sounded like they were educational for people that weren't finance based.
Correct, right. And so I think that's the intention of it. Yeah.
Hey there, it's your host, the FP&A guy, and today I'm thrilled to talk to you about Plan Buddies, where professionals meet excellence. This isn't just any community, it is a community ran by and for planning professionals. At Plan Buddies, we're all about fostering connections, sharing knowledge, and providing mentorship among FP&A experts. Ready to elevate your career? Visit plan-buddies.com and become a member today. And here's a special treat. Use the promo code the FP&A guy, that is the FP&A guy, for an exclusive 25% discount on your first year membership. Fun. I like that. And how has that gone so far for you? Maybe talk about that and just how important it is for non-finance people to understand, at least the basics of finance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like for me, like it stems early on in your career when you're just an analyst and you may be supporting a marketing or a salesperson and you're trying to help them understand the difference between a cash versus an accrual and how that impacts their budget and the timing and so forth. And so like something that, for you or I or anybody else that's been in FP&A or accounting or finance for a long time seems very straightforward. It's not for a lot of people. And so in advising a couple of early startups, a lot of these are technical, product minded, sales driven founders. And frankly, like the basics of how do I manage my cash? How do I forecast sales? How do I build a P? Like really kind of simple stuff as you or I might think about it, kind of overwhelms them to a degree and they don't really know where to start. And I think that's sort of why it came about. And frankly, when you say how's it going, we've really only launched it maybe a few weeks ago. So it's still sort of in the
Okay.
early stages. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I think it's a good outlet and hopefully, people are finding value from it.
Good. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and good luck building that. I know it can be a lot of fun to kind of ride. I know you've been building your brand out there on social media and things.
Yep.
Good luck with that. I know today you're working as a consultant, and one of your focuses is helping cloud first companies optimize cloud spend.
Yeah.
Why is it so important that companies have help managing cloud spend? Why are you out there being a consultant in this area?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. First of all, I mean, consultants is always it's a dirty word. So I, pre- I prefer like fractional leadership, and it's a
Yes,
little
that's the
fancier,
more
more
common one
kind of a
these days.
buzzword, but it sounds better than consultant.
All right, well,
Um,
I'll call you a fractional
I
leader. How's that?
appreciate that. Thank you. Let's go ahead and edit all the prior stuff to that now. No, I think listen, like if you think about like in a software business, generally the two biggest expenses are right people, number one or two, and then right the cost of actually running the software. So the cost of the cloud
Yep.
services, whether it's Google or AWS, Azure, or whatever. If you talk about the people aspect, right, there's entire industries, departments literally dedicated to managing and maintaining that particular resource. But when you look at like the cloud itself, right, outside of sort of recently and sort of the development of sort of the FinOps as a discipline, like there's like nobody is doing this. And so I think for me, like I've lived it firsthand. Like I've been in FP&A and been in finance, owning cloud finance teams, and really seeing that like even the most mature companies are really immature when it comes to a sort of a FinOps posture or a cloud cost management, however you want to describe it. But there's just not a lot of oversight there. And so I think, depending on where the companies are at from a life cycle perspective, some of them may have their own internal FinOps teams. Some companies may not be able to afford a full-on team, and so hiring fractionally, just like any other fractional role, might be a good option. And then some teams generally just don't know where to start. So having somebody who's kind of seen the movie before and can help guide them on even the most basics of how to get started, I think is super beneficial.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. From the conversations I have, I hadn't had to deal with cloud spend. I worked with one company, but that was all managed by the IT side. I focused on everything else in the business for
Yeah.
the SaaS company I worked with. And
Yep.
second one I worked with, I was more in a kind of a sales coordination role. So I haven't had to deal with the cloud spend almost at all, even though I've worked for two SaaS companies.
Yeah.
That's always an interesting area for me. And something you mentioned is, you're starting to see this rise of FinOps and different things. So in your view, let's just talk large companies for a minute,
Yeah.
the big, huge ones that have the huge cloud spend. Should they have a dedicated kind of FinOps team to manage that? Should that sit in FP&A? Does it really matter as long as the person's qualified? I mean, what's your thoughts? How should people be thinking about it as they're
Yeah.
scaling and growing? Because I think it's a area that a lot of people are just not sure what's best practice. How do I think about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there really, for me, when you say FinOps, there's really two things. There's FinOps as a culture and a discipline, which is really about financial stewardship of the cloud and the dollars, ensuring that you're getting the requisite business value.
Yep.
Then there's FinOps as a organizational structure. And so from the first part, I think, right, it's inherent in the word financial operations. It's a financial stewardship driven
Yep.
culture in the first place. Now, obviously, the organizational aspect of it, to your point, more established companies, building the visibility around it, then optimizing the spend, right? Like that is all definitely will be benefited by having a centralized team. And the reason really is like it's a full-time job. Now, whether that team sits within a finance organization, whether it sits under an engineering umbrella or an IT, I don't think really matters. I've seen it in under the finance realm, under my first company, under a more sort of a bifurcation almost under engineering in my second company. And so, you know, regardless of where you put it, it does make sense to have folks dedicated to the management, understanding, and really just providing that level of visibility into your cloud spend.
And do you think there's a point when you kind of should have that dedicated? Because I would imagine small companies, that first FP&A person's going to do it, right?
Yeah.
Whoever that first hire is more than likely is going to manage the cloud spend.
Yeah.
With some help from the business.
Yep.
What's that kind of point? Is it a couple $100 million in revenue?
Yeah.
Is it 50? Is it 1,000 employees? What do you generally think is when you start to say, I really should have a dedicated team, the spend's big enough and the complexity is enough that I'll get value from it? Any thoughts on that? And I know it's going to vary. I know there's not a right answer to this question.
Yeah, as you say, I don't know that there is a threshold of spend or anything like that you can attribute. Hey, this is the point at which we need to, make a organizational change or add another person to the team or whatever it might be. I think like anything, I forget who I was watching a video yesterday and we were talking about sort of the human action model, and like the first point to get anybody to do anything is like basically the presence of discomfort. And so I think for us, like internally when we were building out these teams, like the very first thing that happened was we were realizing our forecast was getting blown out of the water every other month and we had no clue what was going on. So it was like, okay, like we gotta reassess our focus. And then as you dig in there, you're like, okay, well, like, now I need somebody to build and generate the reporting, or do I outsource from a tooling perspective? Well, now we have to go, manage and implement all of these long-term commitments to help optimize our discounting and our rates. And well, who on the engineering side is going to own, all the usage optimization and finding sort of the unattached volumes and all this, all that. There's so much to it, and it's intentionally complex by the providers because like they benefit frankly from it being that way. And so, yeah, I think, it's going to vary largely, but, in my experience, it's anytime they start to experience the pain around it is what ultimately drives the change. So dependent, and you can be a really small company, really big company. It really just depends on that aspect to me.
Once it becomes a big issue because you've missed a large forecast or because the contract doubled in cost, whatever it might be.
Yeah, you may be a super early stage business and your concern is cash burn and runway. And if that's your largest expense item, right, it might make sense to focus a lot of time and effort in optimizing that. And so again, it's going to be super, subjective to different teams. And so
yeah, it's like the idea of when do I get an FP&A tool?
exactly.
Right? Well, when the pain of being in Excel is enough that you'll trade off the loss of some flexibility for all the other benefits that come with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. The cloud spend is painful enough that I'll trade off the cost of another head to manage this process. It will be worth it in the long run. Just like anything, it comes down to a cost benefit analysis, right? We can run those numbers, the optionality, and say, yep, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So what advice would you offer to FP&A professionals that are helping manage cloud spend? They just kind of inherited the task. They joined their first SaaS company and it's like, hey, you now own CloudSpend, and they have no clue. Any advice you'd give to people out there that are trying to get their arms around it? Like, where should they start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, right, like you said, like they're inheriting this. Like you have to take ownership of it. It's easy to in cloud spend because the it's so distributed in terms of, well, who turns on the environments and what engineer designed the product that's running in the product, and who negotiated the vendor agreement. Like, it's very easy to say, well, this isn't my problem. I'm ingesting the actuals, and I can look at it and try to build my forecast from it. But whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, like, it's very easy to sort of just obfuscate yourself from it. And so I think take ownership of it, number one. I think two, again, like the biggest thing, again, going back to what I was just saying, is the collaborative effort that is involved to do this really well. It's almost more than any other aspect of FP&A finance planning I've ever been in, because again, it's so distributed across teams that it truly is sort of an organizational wide effort. And so as an FP&A person, if you can take ownership of it, whether it's a dedicated FinOps team, whether it's a cloud center of excellence, whether you meet once a month with different people, again, I think bringing all of those folks together in one environment to have like a cohesive conversation. And then if you can, again, one of the biggest challenges, again, is generally visibility. So if you can start to provide visibility to the individualized teams around their spend and their volume and so forth, you can then start to hold those teams accountable. That then starts to facilitate, again, more of this culture of financial stewardship. And then from there, that's when you can really start to kind of get moving in terms of then starting to optimize and from a savings perspective and things of that nature.
Got it. And I appreciate that. And what resources are available if somebody wants to learn more about cloud spend? I totally agree with you. The idea of you just got to take ownership.
Yeah.
Don't let it be somebody else's problem. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be your problem when the numbers get bad enough.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so what resources are available? I think they're like, again, I would say it's still a relatively new discipline. But there's a organization called, I think it's FinOps Foundation, and FinOps.org, I think is the name of it. They do a great job of sort of laying out the basic frameworks of what goes into FinOps, from, again, the overall operational aspects. Who are the key personas? How should people operate, within those personas? What are the different ways to optimize and sort of visualizing data? So that's a great sort of place to start. And there's a huge community around that. I think there's a new community that's upcoming from another friend of mine named John Meyer, starting, it's called FinOps Nexus, which again is a sort of this nexus of FinOps and community. And so I think that's a great option. And then frankly, like the Googles and the AWSs and of the world, they do a decent job providing some documentation, within their website. So depending on what you're using, I would start there first and really try to dig in as much as possible. Really understanding, particularly like the pricing aspects, I think are super important, so that you then can start to tie, well, here's this dollar on my invoice. How did it get there relative to then what is the engineering team doing? That will go back to really understanding the business and the product architecture, which again is not natural for most finance people. But when you can start to tie that, I turned this thing on, it created $1 of spend. How did that happen? Then you start to really kind of be able to put all the pieces together when it comes to forecasting for the cloud.
FP&A guy here. Today, I want to talk to you about future finance. Future finance is the passion project of Glenn Hopper, CFO, AI expert, and all-around good guy, and Paul Barnhurst. We're starting a podcast together. Why? Because we want to talk about technology, AI, where finance is going, what the future of finance looks like. So join us on your podcast platform of choice. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, and others. We look forward to you joining us for this new show. It's funny how often it always comes back to follow the flow of the transaction, follow the money through the process, and understand the trigger points and how they impact whatever that amount is at the end.
Yeah, it's not.
Revenue, whatever it might be, just learn the
Yeah,
flows
you
and how
don't.
the business impacts
Yeah,
those
yeah,
flows.
it's not. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Let's say that.
It makes a lot of sense. And for those who are interested, I had Jeff Dursky on. He helps companies
Right.
for Amazon.
Okay.
He works for Amazon Warehouse
Yeah.
Cloud Services. He helps companies manage their spend. So he's a consultant. Companies come to him trying to understand their contracts. So he's often talking to engineering and
Yeah.
FinOps or FP&A. He's written a few good articles. When you said Amazon has some resources, he's written a number of articles of kind of helping bridge the finance and technology. So if anyone's out there listening, I'd recommend, checking him out. I had him on FP&A today, and we discussed some cloud spend things as another resource.
Fantastic. Yeah.
We're definitely all trying to learn if you're dealing with that, because it's still fairly new, like you said.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I've seen a number of studies that says companies have a lot of waste in cloud spend.
Yeah.
There's lots of opportunities to reduce waste. What's been your experience there? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I've seen the same studies you do. Like, so I mentioned that FinOps Foundation, they do like an annual study on sort of cloud spend, and they pulling a ton of different companies. And there's a bunch of sort of cloud cost management platforms that also release their own data. I think to your point, there's, depending on what you're reading, it's anywhere between 20 and 50% waste, cloud waste in an organization. And right, and when you're talking about 600 billion plus spent annually, probably this year on cloud services, like it's not a small number.
Yeah, let's see. If I take 20%, we'll assume the low end, it's 120 billion.
Yeah,
I'll take that.
I mean it's a lot of money, and frankly, like it starts. What I've seen, it really starts at the product development stage, right? So there's not a great framework at that sort of early product inception, product development phase that, at least, 5 years ago, like that didn't really exist well. And so you're moving really fast, you're building these products without really any little understanding of what the cost impact is. And then once it's in production and customers are using it, you're adding on features, right? And the way that the customers interact with the platform may change the cost. And so like it's there's just no perfect science around that aspect of it. And so in that environment, you get, could be right sizing, meaning like you're using a machine type that is way oversized or overpowered for the task that you're doing, right? And so like something as simple as that may mean that you're spending more than you relatively need to. Or when you like the way that compute works in a lot of these is you have to attach like a like memory to them, right? But a lot of times if you don't do it correctly, right, you can have these unattached memory volumes, and right, they're not attached to anything, they're not doing anything, and they're just sitting there in the background costing you money every month and you don't know about it. Or again, rate optimization, right? If you're spending $100 every month, well, and you know that for certain, well, now you can go to Google or Amazon and say, hey, I'll commit $100 every month, and they'll say, well, we'll give you, for just committing, we'll give you 30% off, and now you're spending $70 literally right away. And so like there's a lot of this. Again, I don't think, and this is, again, you asked earlier, like, why did I start that? Like, I just don't think that there's a maturity level around this today until companies start to feel the pain, that really like they're going to focus on these things. So that inherent waste is sort of built into the system right now.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. As I'm listening to you talk and I'm just thinking about it, kind of processing it in my head, it sounds like the immaturity leads to a lot of suboptimal decisions. The frameworks, the learnings, those things from having 30 years of history aren't there.
Yeah.
And so you continually have different cases and different learning cases at all these companies where it's like, oh, if I did that again, I could have saved 40% or 20% or whatever.
Yeah.
I do it differently.
Yeah.
So it's right now it really favors the vendors
Yeah.
as you learn because you're often paying more than you would in an optimized process.
Fair. And I think it comes down, it's a lot of foresight too, right? So we talk,
Sure.
you're building out an early stage company, you're building out a CRM, or you're going to your point earlier, like you're going to go implement an adaptive or an Anaplan or some tool, right? You build it for a purpose of today without like, well, what does this need to look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And then you've seen you sort of get these Frankenstein systems that are band-aided on top of each other and different things. And then when it comes to trying to like unravel that and build something that's actually scalable and efficient, like it's super painful. And so I think that's where we're at, is like there's a lot of just that happening on the cloud side for the last 5-10 years. And now we're getting to the point, and that's sort of what I think FinOps is today, is like as a culture, it's like, well, let's put that sort of financial stewardship mindset at the beginning of the process, ensure that there's business value as we're building the product, so that we can then continue to monitor and analyze it moving forward. That's easier said than done, obviously.
I agree. And you just made me think. So first episode we had of FP&A Tomorrow, episode 1, we did an episode all about product. We brought in 2 product people, 1 FP&A person.
Yeah.
One of the product people, Dara, I actually supported her.
Yeah.
When I worked at Solera, she talked about how it's critical for FP&A to be involved in the early days. And as I hear you talking, I couldn't help think, but this is one of those areas where if you're there from the early days and you're looking at things from the finance and all the different perspectives, you're more likely to catch things than, oh, hey, we got 6 months into it. We're big enough now. Let's bring in finance. And you've kind of already made some architecture and different decisions
Yeah.
that inherently are going to lead to some waste or cost to fix.
Yeah. And like I said, the pricing structures, especially as you get into generative AI and like per request, like it's very complex. And so I talked earlier about like why the cash flow for coders thing, and like some of the different little startups that I've been advising, like a lot of their questions in the early days aren't can you create a P&L? It's like, hey, we want to use this database in our tool. Like, what does that do to the cost of the product? How do I actually model out what we're building? And like it's not always very straightforward. And so like even for a guy who is pretty good with numbers and kind of understands some of this, like even for me it's difficult at times. And so I can imagine if that's not something that is on your frame of reference, like it can be super hard.
FP&A guy here. If you enjoy FP&A Tomorrow, I want to personally invite you to listen to the Financial Modeler's Corner. This podcast is all about the art and science of financial modeling with distinguished financial modelers from around the globe. Check it out today on your podcast platform of choice, Apple, Spotify, and all other major platforms. Listen as we talk to financial modelers and ask them what is their favorite shortcut, what skill helped them most in their career. Should we use circular references, yes or no, and other controversial topics. Tune in today.
I bet I could see where that could be a real challenge. Well, I've really enjoyed discussing the cloud. I think it's an area that people are dealing with the pain today, or at some point in their career, they're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right? The cloud isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
What, 600 billion, expected to get over $1 trillion by 2030, I believe,
Yep.
or even maybe earlier. I've seen different studies.
Yeah.
It's just a huge part of our spend. It's just like SaaS products. They're not going anywhere. We probably all have some that we're wasting money on as a company and as individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
So we're going to move into our next section, which is called kind of the rapid fire section.
Sure.
You get no more than 30 seconds to answer, ideally kind of 15, 20. And then at the end, if you want to elaborate on one, you can. So the first one, and I'm going to guess this will be a pretty easy one for you, but we'll see. What is the one software you can't live without as an FP&A professional?
It's still Excel.
I figured that was going to be the answer.
It'll always be Excel.
It's like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say you can't live without it, like I can live without a different tool and do Excel. So like that, but without that, like
I get what you're saying. You can't live without a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
You could go to Google Sheets
correct.
and still
Yeah,
do
yeah.
your job.
Or
you could go to Equals or any of the 20 out there. So at the end of the day, the answer is probably a spreadsheet than a specific brand.
Fair. Yeah, let's do that.
Hey, we'll go with that. Are you currently using generative AI?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier. I use it in my own personal business just because, again, like, when you're running your own business, you're the marketing, you're the lead gen, you're the biz dev, you're the copywriter. And so, yeah, I definitely use it from that perspective to like get ideas and naming things, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
We talked about
I'm not
that.
sure for me, it's like at the point of using it in like a financial context. I'm not sure that the products are mature enough. Nor do I frankly trust them just yet. So yeah.
Okay, got it. Next one. What is the number one technical skill that FP&A professionals should master?
I don't know. I'm going to cheat because like I don't really ever hire for technical skills. I don't.
Okay.
I think you can squint your eyes and maybe this is technical. I think copywriting, which traditionally is a sales advertising skill. But I think if you think about all of your communications as an FP&A professional, email, presentations, text, Slack channels, like lots of it is over, words on paper. And so I think, that understanding how to sell, and a lot of that is understanding, people's behavior. And so I think, as you grow and learn to sell your ideas and, whether you're asking for a promotion or whatever it is, I think that's, super important skill to have.
I like it. That's the first time we've had that one. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I can see what you're saying. So I appreciate that one. What's the number one soft or human skill we need to master?
Yeah, I think I'll say, I don't want to just say broadly communication, but I think learning to set expectations is super important, especially in a business partner role. You're going to be pulled in a lot of different directions and asked a bunch of different stuff. And it's really up to you to be able to set the expectation with that business partner, client, whatever it is, as to, setting those boundaries and how you operate, what you can and can't provide. And I think if you do that well, you really set yourself up for success. And if you do it poorly, you're going to be looked down upon as someone who can't deliver, frankly.
Got it. All right. So this next section we're going to move into is the get to know you section. This is where we ask some personal questions to get to know you a little bit. What's your favorite hobby, passion that you have?
Yeah, I love golf. I love to
Big
play.
golfer. Watching, playing, all of the above.
My wife hates it when I watch. She'd rather take a nap. She thinks it's boring, but I don't mind. I like to watch it. I don't care if it's PGA Tour or Live Golf or whoever. I'll watch it. And yeah, I love to play it. That's also a big bonus of doing my own thing now. Is like I can pretty much just go play whenever I want.
What is the one book you would recommend to our audience? If you could recommend a book they should.
So the book that I give anybody that's ever worked for me, it's called Lincoln on Leadership. I got first introduced to it when I was in college, I think, like a sales teacher. But really, it's sort of like semi-autobiographical about, Lincoln and his life, but more so around, how he approached, team building and leadership and sort of delegation. And so I think for me, it's been super interesting. And I think it's always very insightful to give people as sort of a window into how I think about the world. So I'd say that, and then, yeah, I'll stop there. But if I've already given one more, I'd say The Psychology of Money is very interesting. I read that one recently.
Okay.
So I think people would get a kick out of that.
Great. I like both those. Lincoln, anything on Lincoln I love. So that's a good one. If you could travel one place in the world tomorrow, where are you going?
I would probably go to, Spain. I go like Barcelona.
All right. So we're going to Barcelona. Fun.
Yeah.
And then if you could have dinner with one person in the world alive today, who are you going to dinner with?
My wife.
Smart man. You're not the first one to give that answer.
We don't get enough time. Now, we have twin 7-year-olds. We don't get to go out enough. So
that's a good point. Now, setting your wife aside, who would be that next pick?
Elon.
Elon would be a fascinating one. It'd be really interesting to have, especially if you could give him some truth serum and you knew you were getting what he really thinks on everything. Because sometimes I think he does a lot of things for shock factor, not that he necessarily totally believes what he's saying.
Yeah, I think that's super fair. I think there's definitely a bit of, personal branding and marketing happening there, but I mean, you can't, you can't ignore the success that the guy has, and the way his brain
Yeah.
works is just outrageous to me. So
Oh, totally agree with you. We're on the same page there.
yeah,
All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I have one more question, and then we'll give you an opportunity to just share if people want to learn more about you, business, how they can
yeah.
contact you. The question I have is, if you could give one piece of advice to our listeners to be a better FP&A business partner, what's the one thing they should be doing?
I would just say be curious. Like we kind of talked about at the beginning of this, right? Like just really being curious and understanding the business, and ultimately doing what you say you're gonna do, right? That's sort of the basis of lots of relationships, and that's really what business partnering is building that trust and ultimately doing what you say you're gonna do. And so I think if you can do those things, like yeah, you'd be super successful.
So last question. People want to learn more about you, get in touch with you. How should they do it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So right now, super active on LinkedIn, at Tyler Cyphers or at the Cloud CFO. One of those two, I don't actually know what it is anymore. Still in the process of building out a website for OpsCipher. Obviously finance guy, not building websites. So it's been a slow process, but you find it,
I remember that
yeah, you find me
process.
at opscipher.com when that's up. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me, shoot me a DM, and I'm happy to engage and have a conversation.
Great. Well, we'll throw your LinkedIn information in the
Awesome.
show notes for sure. And thank you for joining us, Tyler. Enjoyed chatting, and you enjoy the rest of your day. And we're excited to share it with our audience.
Awesome, Paul. Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me on. This is awesome.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to FP&A Tomorrow. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review on your podcast platform of choice. This allows us to continue to bring you great guests from around the globe. As a reminder, you can earn CPE credit by going to earmarkcpe.com, downloading the app, taking a short quiz, and getting your CPE certificate. To earn continuing education credits for the FPAC certification, take the quiz on Earmark and contact me, the show host, for further details.